Eli Rourke got fired in under 3 minutes. Glass conference room. No warning, no meeting invite that said what it was really about. Just a folder, a handshake that lasted too short, and a security badge collected on the way out. 8 years later, Eli walked back into that exact room, sat down in the chair that used to belong to his boss, and fired the man who fired him. Same room, different name on the door. And here's the part nobody expected, least of all Eli. It didn't feel like he thought it would. But let's back up, because this story doesn't start with a firing. It starts with an idea nobody wanted to share credit for. Eli was 26, a junior developer at a scrappy logistics startup called Kane Freight Systems. Small office, big ambitions, run by a founder named Douglas Kane who talked like a visionary and coded like someone who hadn't touched a terminal in a decade. The company moved packages for regional retailers, and it was hemorrhaging money on inefficient routes. Eli spent 4 months, mostly on his own time, building a routing algorithm that cut delivery costs by nearly 30%. He showed it to Kane first. Just Kane. Nobody else in the building even knew it existed yet. 3 weeks later, Kane stood in front of a room full of investors and walked them through his breakthrough, slide by slide, no hesitation. Eli was there too, 3 rows back, close enough to hear Kane use the exact phrase he'd used to explain the algorithm to him privately, word for word, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. His vision, his breakthrough. Nobody in that room had any reason to think otherwise. The funding round that followed was the biggest in company history. Eli asked, quietly, for a raise afterward. Maybe a title? Some kind of credit on paper? Anything. 6 weeks after that, he was gone. Restructuring, they called it. Budget cuts. Nothing personal. And when Eli went looking for his own name anywhere in the patent filing that followed, it simply wasn't there. Now here's a question worth sitting with. What do you do when the thing you built keeps making someone else rich, and there's no lawyer who'll touch a case with no paper trail? Eli didn't sue. He couldn't. What he did instead was quieter, and it took 8 years. He drove a delivery van 3 nights a week to cover rent and coded everything else in between. No investors, no cushion, just a laptop, a folding table, and a routing engine he built from scratch this time. One that didn't belong to anyone but him, filed, dated, and locked down before he ever showed it to a soul. He called it Waypoint. The first year, Waypoint had one client, a regional bakery chain that needed cheaper delivery routes and didn't care that the whole company was one guy answering emails from an apartment. 19 companies turned him down before that bakery said yes. The second year, Waypoint had 11 clients. The fourth year, it had outgrown 3 offices, and Eli had finally stopped driving the van. There was a stretch in year 3 when Eli almost gave up entirely. A server he couldn't afford to fix, 3 months behind on rent, and one client threatening to walk, all in the same week. He kept going anyway, mostly out of spite. Spite, he said later, in an interview nobody expected him to give, kept the lights on when nothing else could. Meanwhile, Kane Freight Systems kept growing too, but on fumes. Because here's the thing about stealing someone else's breakthrough. It works exactly once. Kane never had another idea that big, because he'd never actually had that one. He rebranded the company twice, chasing whatever trend was loudest that year, launched 2 products nobody asked for, and quietly, steadily, competitors like Waypoint kept eating market share he never noticed leaving. Eli might never have learned how bad it had gotten, except for one old coworker who never left. Priya Anand had been in the room the day Eli first showed Kane the algorithm. She remembered it, and she'd quietly kept the email thread all these years, just in case. 9 years later, Priya was running operations finance at what was now called Kane Global, and out of nowhere, she reached out to Eli with 2 words, worth talking. Kane Global was quietly bleeding cash, over-leveraged acquisitions, a board losing patience, and a founder still telling everyone the turnaround was right around the corner. They were looking for a buyer discreetly before the story went public and the stock cratered on its own. Priya thought Eli should know. She didn't say exactly why, She didn't have to. Should Eli walk away? Let the company that stole from him rot on its own, quietly, without his fingerprints anywhere near it? Pause here and guess what he actually did. He didn't walk away. He picked up the phone and he called his board. Eli structured the acquisition through a holding company that didn't carry his name anywhere near the paperwork. Waypoint had the capital, the growth numbers, and quietly, the relationships to make the deal look like nothing more than a strategic buyer with a clean checkbook. His own board pushed back at first, worried it looked personal, worried it was personal. Eli told them the numbers justified it on their own. That part was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Due diligence took 4 months, and it turned up something Eli hadn't expected. Buried in an old legal file was the original patent draft, the one filed the same week his algorithm went to investors. His name was on it. Co-inventor, right where it should have been. Somewhere between that draft and the final filing, legal had stripped it out, and there was no signature from Kane authorizing the change. It didn't clear him. Kane knew the myth wasn't true and let the world believe it for 8 straight years anyway. But it meant the theft wasn't quite the clean, simple villain story Eli had been carrying around in his head for nearly a decade. The deal closed on a Thursday. Waypoint Holdings now controlled 61% of Kane Global. Douglas Kane still didn't know who was sitting on the other side of the table until the signatures were already dry. He found out the next morning in the same glass conference room where he'd once fired a 26-year-old for asking to be paid fairly. Eli walked in, sat down in the chair, and let the silence do most of the talking before he said a word. Kane recognized him almost immediately, and the recognition landed somewhere between confusion and dread. There wasn't a long speech. Eli didn't need one. He told Kane he was terminated, effective immediately, and slid the old patent draft across the table, the one with his name still on it, still legible under 8 years of dust. Kane didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. Not really. More like something in him had been braced for this exact moment for a long time. Quietly. The way you brace for weather you can already see coming. He said the company had never really been his. Not since the day he decided to keep someone else's name off the paperwork. Then he stood, straightened his jacket out of habit, and walked out without asking for severance. And that should have felt like everything. 8 years of driving vans and sleeping 4 hours a night. All of it aimed at exactly this moment. So why didn't it? Eli sat in that chair a long time after Kane left. He'd pictured this scene 100 times, and in every version, he felt lighter walking out than he had walking in. Instead, he felt like a man looking at a chair he now owned, in a company he now ran, with 60-plus employees whose next paycheck depended on decisions he'd have to start making by Monday morning. The myth got corrected within the week. Eli's name went back on record as the true architect of the routing algorithm that had built the company's fortune, publicly, permanently, in every filing that mattered. That part felt right. Priya got the promotion she should have had years earlier, and she took it without ever asking Eli for a thing. But somewhere in month 2 of actually running Kane Global, Eli caught himself doing something that stopped him cold. He was in a budget meeting, cutting a junior employee's proposal without reading past the first page, already halfway to a decision before the kid even finished the sentence. He looked up, and for a second the room went quiet the exact way it used to go quiet around Kane. He knew exactly whose habit that was. He closed the laptop, walked over, and told the junior employee to finish the pitch after all. It wasn't a fix. It was a reminder he still needed. Eli Rourke got fired in under 3 minutes in a glass conference room by a man who never gave him credit. Years later, he fired that same man in that same room and walked out wondering how many minutes it would take before somebody, someday, did the exact same thing to him.